Okay, so recording has started, and without further ado, I would give the floor now to our first speaker, to Dr. Katarzyna Zalas-Kamińska, whose PhD thesis, who she published as a book I had the pleasure to be the reviewer of. So I'm very happy that she agreed to share with us her expertise. She is an assistant professor at the Institute of Political Science with the University of Wrocław in Poland, and her expertise is in development aid and public diplomacy. And Kasia, the floor is yours. Please share your presentation with us, and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Daria. Welcome, everybody. Just give me a second to share the screen. Okay. Is it visible?
Yeah, but you can start from pokaż slajdów, and then it will be better view. And then,
so from the very beginning, welcome you all from Poland, and let's focus on NGOs, social power in Polish public diplomacy. But before we start with the case of Poland, let's have a look at definitions, because as we probably are all aware of, public diplomacy has been defined very broadly. So for my studies, of course, I offer definition I would like to follow. However, as the NGOs are involved in the Polish public diplomacy mainly on the rules with MFA, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Cooperation, I also decided to put the definition of the MFAs here. So as you can see, there are some similarities between us. I treat public diplomacy mainly as a form of political communication, and I consider it within two contexts: the image building and the relationships building. To make it clear, I also put social power definition here. I treat it as the ability to set some norms and values. So in general, it is about setting the standards to me. That's how I understand it. So if it's clear for us, let's go back to the case of Poland and NGOs. What's the involvement of them in the Polish public diplomacy? Well, mainly it's cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs based on calls for proposals. I left here the title, public diplomacy. That's how the competition is called. There have been some others. I also have them here. They were based on Polish-Belarusian cooperation and also on Czech Republic relationships. So, but this one, public diplomacy, is the most common. It's been conducted since 2005. So this is what I would like to focus on. So this is how the cooperation looks like in general. When we have a look at the examples, because what I need to say and what I would like to emphasize is the fact that within those 10 or 15 minutes, it's of course not possible to describe all the activities. So I had no choice but to provide you with some examples. So when it comes to, when it comes to countries and fields, so let's say the topics. In general, what, as I said, needs to be emphasized is that the scope and thematic spread of projects was very wide. So as I said, probably it wouldn't be possible to provide you with them all. But as I said, also according to my research, there are some topics I would say, or I would point us as the most common. including, as you can see, Polish experience of successful transformation, or correcting the negative image of Poland. Some actions were related to famous Poles, I mean, those which are famous abroad, of course. There were also kind of debates, mainly on Polish-Jewish dialogue, but also on the future of the European Union. So what I could add here is that some of the activities were obviously aimed at general strengthening the positive image of Poland among different societies of countries, you know, from Japan to Germany, Great Britain to Belarus. So again, what I said before, it was very wide when it comes to both countries and topics. My research was based on 9 years, and I finished in 2012, but I thought it would be good for us all to have a chance and to have a look at some currently conducted initiatives, which were added here in my presentation. So here you will find, you will see again, just some examples. What I may say again in general, since 2015, 2016, when the ruling party came to power, what might be recognized is that most of the projects were focused on Polish history, also those projects within which the Christianity or the faith could be emphasized. This is what I could see here. But of course, that wasn't all. I mean, it was a kind of specific thing I could notice. Also, I could hear it from some NGOs representatives. This is what they confirmed. But of course, we had, for example, Polish Days in Armenia, promotion of Polish history in culture, and the promotion of IT masters. So again, quite a long list of topics, and it will be similar with the countries. I left this year, so that I wanted to give you a chance to see what are the preferences, let's say, this year. Those projects they've been conducting, so we will see what kind of the results. Again, we can see here some general ideas and some examples. So as you can see, we have projects related to, again, history, economics, the general image, also what was added, the construction of this information. Again, quite a long list of the initiatives. And of course, I chose only examples of those initiatives that were conducted in cooperation with NGOs. So you won't see here all of them. But just to make it clear how this scope and the topics were wide. So I hope it's clear and you can see it. What is in my interest, especially interest, is something that you may see now. So some intersections between, that's how I called it, between public diplomacy and development aid. Because as Galia said, this is what I'm the most interested in, and this is what I research. When it comes to this context, I mean the context of NGOs activities, again, let's have a look. What I found to be a common topic. So something that where any relations between public diplomacy and development aid might be found here is, as you can see, democracy promotion, strongly related with know-how in successful transformation. To be honest, it was, I would say, number one when it comes to the results of my studies and those relationships, intersections between those two fields. But what also might be seen here is, for example, study visit to Poland with the involvement of NGOs, of course, but also media, sometimes even some experts from Poland. We also can see here scholarship programs, exchange. So again, quite a long list of those topics which I could find to be common for both. To this list, I would, of course, add those related again to economics, including tourism and culture. And obviously media, again in a different form. When I was preparing the presentation for today, I put the key question for myself. I mean, what are the most important aspects of this social power exercised by NGOs engaged in public diplomacy? And I found three elements which I would like to tell you about. The first one is attracting, which is strongly related to the way how I defined public diplomacy. So their role here is to attract attention to Poland, including promoting some values, also to carrying the narrative. Here, what I may see now when it comes to this, to the war in Ukraine, I see that's not the first time when I see it, because it was also one of the element I emphasized years ago. But what I can see now, I can see it strongly, and it's just, you know, a way how I may find another evidence to what I presented as the result of my research. Solidarity. It is something that has become the let's say Polish value. Apart from the fact that you don't have to agree with it, this is what I may observe. And NGOs, they are the best actors to promote this kind of value and to carry this solidarity narrative abroad. The second element which I would put on the table is education, not only on the history, some elements of economy, culture, but also when it comes to social power, including social participation, because this is what I may see when it comes to their involvement in Polish public diplomacy. And of course, maybe quite tough topic for some actors, but they enforce discussions in different ways. They conduct advocacy activities. They are into monitoring projects, but also the directions of the Polish foreign policy. So this is where I see their role as well. And those three elements I would see here as those related to social power, when of course it comes to their involvement in Polish public diplomacy. One more thing which I would like to add at the end, when we think about Poland as a kind of brand, because it is also something that's been researched when it comes to the case of Poland. There are two elements I think you may find interesting. The first one is that according to the directions of the promotion of Poland, what should be used when we talk about this country is the original Polish version of the country's name. So it should be Polska, not Poland. So this is one of the ideas when it comes to the promotion of Poland, which, as I said at the beginning when I was saying about the way how I understand public diplomacy, would be this context of the image building. And the second element, which would be the context of relationships building, is that according to this document mentioned before, but also to some study results, when it comes to the best resource of Polish soft power, it is said that we are this resource, I mean including me, so Poles. This is the point here. So it could be successfully implemented into the narrative that was mentioned by me before. With this conclusion, I'm going to leave you. If you have any questions, I'm of course open to discuss. I know that there have been so many elements, but I tried to do it the best I could to give you a chance to have a look at quite a long period, because the first call for proposal was in 2005. Now we know where we are, but I wanted to give you a perspective for all those years, which was quite challenging, but maybe we'll have a chance to discuss it in more details. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasia. Much appreciated, very informative. Indeed, the agenda for this webinar was finalized before the war in Ukraine started. So I'm sure our topic, we can go back to it in the discussion. I myself have questions to you that relate to the current situation. I would like now to move on and to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Catherine Turner, who is an associate professor in law. So we have here a person with a legal background. She's the deputy director of the Durham Global Security Institute, and her research focuses on international humanitarian law, peace mediation, and transnational justice. And the floor is yours now. You need to unmute yourself first. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Galia, and thank you also for the invitation to join you this afternoon. So when I was first invited to participate in this webinar, Galia suggested that we would be interested in discussing Ireland's experience with women mediators and women in mediation. And we broadened that out gradually to include also this new phenomenon of women's mediator networks. So what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes is to bring these two into dialogue. So to look at the experience of Ireland and women mediators in Ireland in the broader global context, and to think about what that means for women mediators and these networks as civic actors in public diplomacy. So I'm not sure the background of the audience. So I just want to begin with a sort of action around sort of where this sits discipline-wise. The question of women in mediation and women mediators ultimately is located within the broader field of the women, peace and security agenda. And for those who aren't familiar with the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, it has its origins in a landmark resolution passed by the Security Council back in the year 2000, Resolution 1325, in which the Security Council, responding to significant advocacy and lobbying from civil society, recognised in this resolution the impact of war and armed conflict on women, and that women should have a role to play in decision making in the field of peace and security. So this is really the origin of a lot of the initiatives that I'm going to talk about, and it's the way in which these initiatives are, I suppose, framed and assessed as well globally. And since 2000, there have been a number of resolutions under this agenda, but there's been a gradual movement of what it means to participate in peace and security. And so where it begins, and these have been developed through a series of resolutions under what's known as the participation pillar of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which tries to define and articulate ways in which women can be brought into and can participate in the spaces of peace and security. And so over the years and through the resolutions, we've had the development of this, where it begins really with women participating in high-level political peace processes. More recent resolutions have really focused on the importance of civil society, on the importance of enabling civil society's voices to be heard in peace processes, and in providing the necessary funding and structures to enable that to happen. So now under the agenda and in the resolutions, we have a much more nuanced understanding of the different roles that women play, and also the ways in which civil society is a key enabler of women's participation in peace and security. And so this is really the kind of the background to the question of women mediators. But it's relatively recently within this history that we have started to look specifically at women as mediators. Previously, what we had was a rather undifferentiated category of women to participate in peace processes. Usually what this meant was women's platforms and women participating in high-level processes on a platform of women's rights or women's concerns. So it's only really since about 2015 or shortly after that the attention turned to women in the role of media and specifically what they could contribute to overall thinking in relation to women, peace and security, but peace and security more broadly. So turning to the Northern Ireland experience then. So the story of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition is very well known. You know, it's a paradigmatic case in the women, peace and security community because of the success of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition in organising themselves politically, in standing for election and in securing those seats to participate in the peace negotiations from '96 in Northern Ireland. And this success, the ability of the Women's Coalition to put themselves forward in that way and to organise, was down to the existence of a strong grassroots movement within Northern Ireland of women's organisations that they were able to build on and that they were able to mobilise to put forward candidates for election. So, but in addition, at this time in Northern Ireland, so we're talking really sort of the 1990s, in addition to this strong women's movement, we also had the development within Northern Ireland of a strong third sector, if you like. So good relations, civic mediation and peace building work were all being developed in Northern Ireland at that time as well. And if you can see the diagram there, what was interesting to me when I looked at the question of women mediators in Northern Ireland was that there's a small amount of overlap between these two. But actually the overlap is not significant. So a very campaigning on women's rights and then a very strong peace building movement that was largely silent on the question of women's and women's rights. And so this is in the 1990s, and this predates any of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. It predates Resolution 1325. So we are still just talking about political mobilisation here, rather than framing it as particular demands in relation to peace and security. And as I said, the overlap between these two groups, there's a small number of women who have a foot in both camps, but largely separate, with separate concerns, with separate ways of working. But I was interested then in this peace building side, where would we find the women? Okay, so did we have women who were working as mediators and who were doing that specifically as mediators rather than as political advocates for the women's sector? And so what I did then was to identify and interview some of these women. Mostly the women were those from outside who've been working in peace building, who'd been working in civic mediation and good relations and social cohesion work in this period of time, but that weren't strongly associated with the Women's Coalition or with that element of political mobilisation and women's mobilisation that was better documented in research. And so this is written up in an article called Soft Ways of Doing Hard Things, which to me is an absolutely beautiful article because of the way in which the women express the value of the work and express the motivations that they had in doing it. So the article is available access and it's hyperlinked in the slides here for when Galia shares afterwards. You can access the full text online. But what came out of this research was that women had very specific understandings of what they were contributing to the peace process or to movements towards talks and towards peace in their mediation practice. And there's 4 of them set out here that come out very clearly in the article. The first was that they really valued relational approaches to mediation. So being able to make connections, they emphasized listening and the importance of listening and empathy. They reflected on how they felt that women were often more attuned to emotion or to unspoken words. So they were really able to read situations, read silences. And that they valued this listening skill and being able to prioritize listening. So making it the most important element of their mediation practice as a means of building trust with different parties and different constituencies at that time. Okay, so their bridge building role. They all reflected on the fact that they felt that they were seen as non-political. So the men didn't regard these women as threatening. They weren't trying to fit them into the hierarchy or the pecking order. And as a result, they didn't feel they were in competition with them. And they didn't need to establish themselves in the same way as their male counterparts did. And they felt that this really brought them a soft form of authority. Some of them reflect on the men, almost, I suppose, looking after them like their mothers. That they were able to build on, take these connections. The third one was quietness as a strategic tool. And these are just some of the quotes that came out. You know, I always hear 2 or 3 war stories quietly in the corner. And I learned how to sidle up to these difficult conversations in a gentler way. And I never wanted to be a big presence. I wanted to be a quiet presence. And this comes out really quite starkly in the interviews across a number of different women, that this was their approach. They didn't want to be the center of attention. They were a quiet presence there to facilitate. And the fourth one was then experience-based knowledge, where they were engaging in culturally sensitive and using context-specific knowledge. So using their knowledge of the communities that they were working within. So for example, women with religious backgrounds were able to build bridges with other women within churches, for example, by understanding the customs and the mores of the churches. Sometimes this was things like staying behind after a meeting to wash the dishes. And then you would hear the political views of the women in a way that you were never going to hear in a public meeting with the men present. This was building on their own knowledge of society and being sensitive to the gender roles and the norms at that time. Now, these approaches are all specific. They're all articulated by the women as strategic in terms of what they do, but it really clearly differentiates what they are trying to do from the hard bargaining or power-based negotiation approach that's associated with high-level peace processes. Okay. But crucially, what the women identified was that these skills and these strategies that they were using was what enabled them to be successful mediators. And some of the successes were spectacular in terms of what the women achieved. And this is not just Northern Ireland. So since the attention has turned to women mediators more generally, we're starting to see much more research globally on what are women doing, what skills are they bringing to mediation, and what are they achieving as a result. And so you can see at the different levels, women are engaging in mediation, peace and security work. So at the international level, that could be participation in consultative fora for international processes. So things like advisory boards for the Syrian process, for the Yemen process, and women participating through gender commissions and mechanisms such as those that have been created in Colombia. At the national and regional level, there's documented evidence now of women mediating conflict over land and resources, particularly where these conflicts are borders. So between herders and pastoralists, for example, where women are involved in mediating these disputes and finding local resolutions to them. The reintegration of offenders, particularly in the context of demobilization and reintegration programs, where competents are coming back into communities and women are helping to smooth that process and helping to put in place mechanisms for dealing with conflict between returning fighters and the community that they return to. And also equipping the youth to participate in communities in those ways. And finally, then at the local level, we see women involved in mediating interreligious or communal conflicts as key intermediaries within their own communities, engaging on behalf of communities in conflicts with local authorities, and negotiating humanitarian access on a local level, for example. And you can see, as the diagram visually suggests, these things aren't all separate. Each of these is connected in this ecosystem, if you like, of conflict and security work that happens. But what women find is they are excluded usually from the very top levels. So women are very heavily overrepresented in the local level, less represented at national, and significantly underrepresented when we get into the realm of public diplomacy and when we get into the realm of political mediation and negotiation. And so the Women's Mediators networks were created specifically as a means of trying to bridge this gap. So trying to get women into the spaces of political negotiation and political influence. And we've got quite a number of them now. So you can see mostly they're created regionally. So Southeast Asia, the Arab region, the African Union, Mediterranean, the Nordic, and women mediators across the Commonwealth. And each of these has a specific regional focus, and each of them builds on their own skills and experience. So the Arab Women's Network, for example, focuses primarily on women in the role of ambassador or above, and very much focused on diplomacy. The Nordics as well, they've got so much experience in media, particularly at the governmental level, that their network coalesces around that. Women mediators across the Commonwealth is interesting in that it consciously chose to be a grassroots network between, grassroots network that was connecting women on the ground rather than always focusing up at public diplomacy. But so while each of them responds to their own context, it's possible to identify these three cross-cutting aims. Okay, and so one is to increase the visibility. One is to develop capacity and skills of women in mediation. But the interesting one is to strengthen inclusive mediation and sustainable peace agreements. And the way that they do this is to create a structured foreign policy mechanism through the national action plans of the relevant supporting states that has as its mandate amplifying the voices of local level grassroots peace builders through these processes. So as I said, each one of these is created as a foreign policy mechanism, and it creates networks not only between the local women themselves, and each network has its own operational partner that administers the network on behalf of the supporting state. And we have a very strong network then of operational partners across these networks, which also creates a network in the relevant governmental level. So each of the units responsible for hosting a network or funding a network is also then in dialogue with our counterparts across other networks. And you can see this at the bottom there, this global alliance of women's mediator networks. So all of a sudden, what we have is this sophisticated foreign policy infrastructure that has, as it seems, not only getting women into these very high-level processes, but finding ways of amplifying the voices of grassroots women, women in NGOs and in civil society, and bringing their influence into conflict resolution effectively. And these are really, I mean, they've really taken off in popularity. States want to be seen to be doing these. They've been key elements of Security Council bids, Ireland and Norway, for example, and they are kind of the really talking points. So just to reflect on to bring it back to Ireland, this remains, I mean, there have been conversations around this in Ireland and the extent to which such a network would be beneficial. I mean, at the moment it remains informal, but we see, and particularly there's a really strong emphasis on good relations and even within the women's sector in Northern Ireland now on promoting mediation skills and mediation training for women as an element of social cohesion, you know, so where this civil society is holding things together when the policy way reminiscent of the 1990s, in my view. And Ireland is incredibly well networked as a result of this, then, that we've got this story to tell, not only on the women's contribution to peace processes, but the development of this civic infrastructure through mediation and the ability of those civic actors to speak to the government actors and to exert influence and to project influence out globally in a way that the Department of Foreign Affairs is really good at doing, particularly through the Security Council seat. And so I think they're really sort of a key mechanism to think about how NGOs and how civil society actors are engaging in this political and public diplomacy space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Well, listening to you and the way Northern Irish women with soft, quiet, understated ways achieve their aims, I couldn't help thinking about not only Ukrainian women, but basically women in Europe that are now in a pretty explicit way protesting against rapes in a war-torn Ukraine, how much different strategy they use. So, but okay, I will not take any more time now from our third speaker. I would like now to introduce Dimitris Tsirakis, who is now with the European Commission. His background is with international and European affairs. And I invited him because he wrote a very interesting MA thesis, to which I hope he will refer to now. His interests are in international diplomacy, public diplomacy, diaspora studies. And so, Dimitri, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Galia. Let me share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Moment, please. I'm sorry, I'm having some issues myself. Okay, sorry for that. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor for me to speak here to you and with you today. My presentation will be loosely based on my research. As Galia already said, diaspora as a diplomatic tool in the era of new diplomacy, a comparative case study of Greece and Ireland, from which I will draw interesting lessons learned from Irish diaspora diplomacy. Please excuse me if I'm not completely up to date at the moment. I'm not sure if you are seeing the right slides at the moment.
We see some small fish. Maybe I should try and share your presentation from my desktop. Would you like to?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, just a second. it should be this one, I hope. Sorry. Okay, does everybody see it now? Is it okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, we move beyond the beautiful fish. Yes.
Yes. Yes. The beautiful fish were there to introduce that at the moment I'm not working on diaspora diplomacy, but as Galia said, I work on maritime affairs and fisheries for the European Commission. And although fish also migrate, as far as we know, they do not engage in diaspora diplomacy. Nonetheless, I have a very genuine interest in the topic, and I will be keen to present my point of view and hear from my colleagues. About myself, I am half Greek, half Dutch, and at the moment I live and work in Brussels. So in some way, I could be considered part of both the Greek and the Dutch diaspora, depending on what one understands as diaspora, of course. So on to the main part. Diplomacy is one of the oldest instruments of statecraft and one of the longest standing institutions of the international system. However, diplomacy has been changing and evolving for some time now. Diplomacy has gone public and new types of diplomacy and diplomatic tools have emerged. The number of actors has pluralized. Galia, could you please move to the next slide? And one more. Diaspora is a work of Greek origin, which means to sow or to scatter, typically referring to the scattering of seeds. Due to the forcible expulsion of Jewish people from Babylon, with which it is associated, it has historically carried a tragic connotation. But diaspora doesn't have to be tragic. It can be beautiful and create great benefits for both the home country as well as the host country. Although diaspora can be defined in several ways, one can describe it as a people with a common origin who reside more or less on a permanent basis outside the borders of their homeland. Diaspora members identify themselves as part of the homeland's national community. Three overlapping elements, relocation, connection, and return, constitute the idea of diaspora. Galia, please. So, international migration is an increasingly important development issue. With migration becoming more important, so will diaspora. Diasporas are an inevitable part of migration and are worth to be analyzed. Diasporas worldwide are growing. In 1990, 150 million people were living in a country other than the one they were born in. Now that number is 280 million. And also in recent developments, such as in Ukraine, have shown how important diasporas are. Ukrainians worldwide helping their own country. However, also people and countries helping their own diasporas in Ukraine or different diasporas helping each other. I know, for example, that the Greek diaspora in Romania helped the Greek diaspora in Ukraine. In its restricted usage, the word diaspora has been applied from antiquity to Jewish, then to Greek and Armenian social formations. But recent years, there has been an increased interest in diasporas due to the new diasporas coming to prominence. For instance, the Chinese and Indian diasporas have had a significant contribution in transforming their home countries in the powerhouses that they are today. Greece, particularly, has had a very long history of diaspora diplomacy. Already during the formation of the modern Greek state, there was some sort of diaspora diplomacy. Greece is one of the few countries that has a separate and independent secretariat under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for diaspora issues, already since 1983, when it was a pioneering practice. But as diplomacy has been changing, so should diaspora diplomacy. One of the most progressive countries when it comes to modern diaspora diplomacy is Ireland. Please move to the next slide. Thank you. Diaspora diplomacy is not a well-known term, and academic research has been limited on the topic. However, in recent years, there has been an increasing interest. Diaspora diplomacy can be defined as a collective action that is driven, directed, and sustained by the energy and charisma of a broad range of migrants who influence another country's culture, politics, and economics. Please, Galia. And diasporas are not merely a tool, but an independent actor in a polylateral dimension. States do not have complete control over their diaspora. However, home states can still guide their diasporas in a certain direction. Can we please move to the next slide? So, there are changes in diaspora composition. Gone are the times that the main contribution of diaspora was only the money sent back home to support their poorer relatives. Diasporas can offer so much more than just financial aid. It is up to the home countries, however, to find how to nurture these opportunities and ensure that they get the most out of it. Diasporas are less homogeneous as well than they used to be in the past. In the past, in the case of Greece and of most migrant-sending states, migrants were often poor and impoverished people. During recent economic crises, many people left their country, but these were often high-educated people, people that their countries have invested in and count on for their future. Both Greece and Ireland were hit hard by significant brain drain. This is not a problem unique to these two countries. Many countries have faced or will face brain drain. As emigrating has become easier, many more countries are plagued by the loss of human capital. Moreover, they are more loosely organized than in the past. In the past, migrants would often settle in the same area as other migrants from their home country, directly creating a diaspora community. The first thing that Greeks would do abroad was first to build a Greek Orthodox church, and second, to create a Greek school. This is not the case anymore. Most migrants don't belong onto organized structures anymore and don't have official representation. They are also much more geographically scattered and have much less in common with each other than diasporas in the past. They come from more diverse places of their home country. They have very different education and interests. People come from all different backgrounds, paths of life, age groups, and professions. Finally, there are also many people who would not have fitted within the traditional term of diaspora, but who could, however, be very beneficial to their home country. You have, of course, many second or third degree migrants, but it's also getting more common to have people like me with parents from two different countries. And you also more often have people born to non-native parents who in their turn emigrate. For instance, in the case of Greeks, there are many people born to Albanian parents who were raised in Greece, who speak Greek, who went to Greek schools and feel Greek. Some of those during the crisis moved back to Albania, others emigrated to, for instance, the UK or Germany. Please, the next slide.
Sorry, I was just reading the, okay, what happened now? Okay.
So what is Ireland doing? As said earlier, not everyone uses this term diaspora in the same way. The Irish Abroad Unit actively uses the staggering number of 70 million when referring to their diaspora. This, however, by no means is the number of Irish emigrants or even of Irish citizens abroad. The 70 million could be seen as what the Irish Constitution refers to as people of Irish ancestry, living abroad, who share its cultural identity and heritage. Nonetheless, the usage of the 70 million says a lot about the Irish diaspora strategy. Inclusive. We are not going to put in place complicated rules to define whether you are Irish or not. If you feel Irish and want to be involved, you are Irish. And not only does Ireland define its diaspora based on the widest possible definition, but they also actively try to reach out to all these people and nurture their Irishness, and often successfully. Furthermore, we will see from the examples later on that Ireland facilitates cooperation with and between universities, NGOs, companies, and individuals from the Irish diaspora and Ireland itself. Ministries of Foreign Affairs cannot develop and execute successful diaspora strategies by themselves. They need the support of all these other actors. Although the aforementioned brain drain is traditionally associated with negative effects, this does not have to be the case. Brain drain can be reversed. Brain drain can become brain gain and brain circulation through the use of knowledge and networks of diasporic communities. Therefore, it is critical for countries to introduce diaspora strategies which facilitate this. Ireland is one of those countries that have successfully implemented such strategies. Let's look at some examples of initiatives that have been implemented by Ireland. One prominent example is the Global Irish Network. This is a network consisting of 300 of the most influential Irish and Irish-connected people abroad who provide Ireland with valuable international expertise. It consists of people from diverse groups spread of over 40 countries and who are willing to get involved in delivering economic developments in Ireland. With their reach, power, and influence, Ireland tries to gain an important competitive edge in engaging new and emerging markets. The Global Irish Network has a facilitation role, an advisory role, and works closely together with the ministry, embassies, and the different independent Irish diaspora organizations. In all of this, it is evident that key is networks and cooperation. The Irish Abroad Unit is not controlling what and how everything will exactly be done. Instead, it is supporting the whole process. The initiatives are coming bottom up from the diaspora itself, with a little steering towards the issues that the Irish government finds of strategic interest, such as research and innovation, international education, entrepreneurship, and export. Then we have the Global Irish Contacts Program. This program has connected 120 members of the Global Irish Network to provide ongoing mentoring to small and medium enterprises. And there is also the Irish Design Week, which was a series of events which had as a goal to raise the reputation of Irish design worldwide while encouraging links between local and global Irish designers. And then there is the Irish Technology Leadership Group, another exceptionally interesting network initiative, a venture capitals group that's set up by Irish entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. This is an NGO established by 55 senior executives of world's leading corporations. The goal of the organization is to promote the technology connection between Ireland, Silicon Valley, and the USA. The network focuses on entrepreneurship, female leadership, young innovators, and education. Yes, thank you. From the above examples, we take away that the importance of knowledge sharing and access to networks. Talent and skills are becoming the most precious assets of the world. Knowledge has the potential to circulate rather than only travel back to the origin country, and can be even more important than financial remittances. Education, mentoring, and entrepreneurship, knowledge sharing could, for instance, be pursued via exchange of personnel in the areas of science, medicines, and professional fields, including business management. For this to be done successfully, the right mentality needs to be present, and ministries of foreign affairs and bureaucratic obstacles need to be minimized. Expatriate networks can potentially form a significant resource when they are connected to countries of origin. In recent years, the role of networks as a tool to diplomacy has been highlighted in international relations literature. Diaspora are naturally such a network that could be used as a tool of diplomacy and is ready, there, waiting to be nurtured. In order for diaspora to flourish in the modern age, the following changes are necessary. First of all, a change in mentality. It needs to be open and approachable. The organizational culture of a foreign ministry needs to be modernized. It should become more flexible and transparent. The diplomats and other employees need to become more open-minded and approachable, and the decision-making process needs to become faster and more responsive. Moreover, an inclusive attitude needs to be adopted concerning what constitutes diaspora. There is a need for concrete, long-term diaspora strategy that will be characterized by continuity. Wanting to engage in diaspora diplomacy, having a strong diaspora and a special unit for diaspora diplomacy is not enough. Neither is having funding for it. It needs to be clear what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs wants to achieve, why they want to achieve it, and how they are going to try and achieve it. And then it is important to work with short-term, tangible, and realistic goals. In addition, the individual initiatives need to be tailor-made for specific types of diaspora members and correlating sub-goals of the diaspora strategy. However, the different initiatives executed all need to be part of this greater diaspora strategy and work towards achieving the same goal. Random, standalone initiatives are a waste of resources. And finally, governments should adopt a facilitating role instead of an implementing role. Give diasporas the tools and let them help you. Knowledge sharing and access to network constitutes two of the main benefits that a country can achieve through diaspora diplomacy. In this world of new diplomacy, where non-state actors play an increasingly more active role in diplomacy, diaspora as an independent actor will also play a more active and unrestrained role. Consequently, it becomes even more important for the home country how it will manage its state-diaspora relationships. All in all, learn from other countries, but remember that every diaspora is unique, and so should each country's diaspora strategy be. Thank you very much, and apologies for technical issues.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Dimitri. I saw Božena was raising a hand. Well, Božena, I hope you can wait. Like 15
sorry,
minutes.
it was just mistake. My phone fell on my keyboard, sorry.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dimitri. I'm taking away the very constructive brain circulation concept from one of the things I'm taking away from your presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to our discussant, Dr. Martin Russell, whose PhD was with the Clinton Institute of University College Dublin, and his expertise is in Irish diaspora in Northern Ireland peace process, as well as diaspora media, diaspora philanthropy, and diaspora politics. And I'm very much interested as well to hear your feedback on those three presentations. The floor is yours.
Hi, Galia. First of all, thank you to the speakers and everybody joining online. It's a Friday afternoon. I know we need to keep some time for Q&A, so you made a very dangerous decision, Galia. You said, let the Irish person be the discussant. And when Irish people emigrated, we got a nickname, and it was called Mix. And people quickly realized that you should never give a Mick a microphone because you might not get it back. So after 10 minutes, just mute me and we can get to the Q&A. And I was kind of chuckling away when Demetrius said that, you know, he doesn't think that fish are involved in diaspora diplomacy. Trust me, Demetrius, the Irish would have tried if it was possible, you know, because look, I come from an island off the edge of Europe. We are a tiny dot on the map. And what's really interesting is that we realized very early was that, you know, for us to have any sense of influence in the world, we were going to need the people that had left the island. And I think that's where I'd like to begin in terms of reflecting on the presentations and what we heard over the last maybe kind of 30 to 45, 50 minutes. Because what's really interesting is that the core concepts of diplomacy have come up again and again across the three presentations in a sense of power and influence. But I think what's becoming really, really important is that the nuance in how we're approaching these topics and the critical evidence we're building in terms of who actually wields the power to really transform this landscape moving forward is changing in front of our eyes. Now, that can be challenging, but it can be opportunity as well. And I think when we begin to look about what we heard about over the last, as I say, kind of three presentations, issues of soft power, social power, community change makers. And for me, one of the really interesting things that I kind of took out of the presentations was a sense of my own academic research was the evolving connotations of power, from hard power, which we're sadly seeing on the continent of Europe today, to soft power, which I think everything has been discussed today, but also to the work of Professor Anne-Marie Slaughter, who talks about smart power. And essentially, I think it synthesizes a lot of what we've talked about already in a sense of networks and power and influence really operating not just through the state, but above the state and below the state. And that's a quote from her work that really stuck with me. And I think what we have to be conscious of is, you know, when we look across the presentations that we heard today, where's our entry point? So when we begin to see the incredible and interesting work of Poland in the sense of who are the actors around the diplomatic table to help those state-led actors have their influence in the world and how that's evolving, then we begin to look at our entry point as community change makers or community gatekeepers or however we want to frame it, and the sense of how are they involved around that table for influence in the networked age. And then, as we say, different initiatives and different cohorts. So what I want to really push at in the sense of we need to think critically, I think, from the presentations about what does that diplomatic landscape in the networked age look like? And most importantly, who are the actors and the skills that we need around the table to execute? And I think that will be dependent on our entry point. I think that brings us to the second point that I'd like to consider. And I think it's an interesting one. And I was at, again, I know this has been recorded. I don't know if I should say this, but I will. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be at a gathering of global Irish diplomats recently. And a point was raised by one of our leading politicians that said the lines between domestic policy and foreign policy are blurry. And I think that's really important to consider when we begin to think about how are we actually conceptualizing how our diplomacy is enacted in the world in front of us. What does that mean in terms of the presentations? For me, what I saw was in many ways, I don't know if it's a tension, but definitely a discussion around the relationship between the state and the nation. And for me, there's a very subtle difference between that. For me, the sense of statehood are lines on a map, you know, when you really think about it, and everything that comes with that in terms of borders and boundaries. But a sense of nation, I think, is something softer. It's something as Demetrius and Katarzyna and Catherine in terms of different sense of affinities and how you identify. So it could be that you have a hyphenated identity. It could be that you're passionate about women empowerment and peace building and change making. It could be that you're passionate about the cultural heritage, cultural brand of your country abroad. But for me, the sense of nationhood extends far beyond that concept of statehood. And I think that's something in Ireland that we've really tried to work with. Again, as being a small island, off an island, off the edge of Europe, we had to realize that our global influence could not be confounded by the lines on a map. We had to think bigger. We had to be a bit more ambitious. So I wanted to get at that sense of domestic and foreign policy blurring, because I think it came up again and again, particularly when you're looking at areas of peace building. And that's really interesting. When you're looking at Poland as a brand and nation branding, that becomes interesting. You have that tension or maybe opportunity to explore a bit more. And for me, quickly on the diaspora side of it, because that's where my passion is as a researcher, I think what's interesting as well is that we tend to think of our entry point traditionally in diaspora engagement just as countries of origin. But I also think with the mobility of people, we have to think about how we evolve ourselves domestically and foreign policy in terms of the people that call our island home or our country home, so as a country of residence, and begin to think through that. And I see Risha Aurora in the crowd today. I know she doesn't have the screen on. She's doing incredible research on that at the moment. So a quick shout out to Risha. The final point I wanted to reflect on, because I want to get to questions more so than people hearing me, was I think what we got a sense of today is that once we take a step back and we look at that public diplomacy, diaspora diplomacy, peace building, when we look at those different respective tables and we try to figure out who should be around them, I think we have some really interesting decisions to be made moving forward. What we've seen is that the different actors that have been represented in the presentations, whether they're civil society organizations, NGOs, right up to international dialogues and high-level peace-building processes, different layers of the community can do different things for you. And I think what's really interesting for me, and we should never be afraid to say this publicly, is that sometimes we take these different layers for granted. So what we've seen in the presentation is that it can go from grassroots to networks of affluence and influence. And I think there's different engagement strategies to engage across that spectrum. So I think we need to really work at the nuance in the sense of where does each of these actors fit? What type of capitals do they bring to the table? And what type of structures or strategies do we need? But most importantly, what type of funding and investment do they need? I think sometimes when we talk about NGOs and we talk about their impact to society, we tend to forget that, you know, they have bills to pay, whether that's staffing, electrical bills, everything that goes with it. So what I would say through the papers for me was, how are we going to come out of this type of conversation with the long-term vision that can really inspire people to not just support the organizations, you know, on a day-to-day basis, but invest in their sustainability and put them in a position to grow and prosper as they move forward. So I close on that note because I'm looking at the time, and I think if we get in by 5 past, we're pretty much on track. So I want to close by thanking the speakers and their reflections. And look, I'm happy to answer any questions as well that anybody in the audience may have, just in what I've kind of said over the last kind of 8 to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin. I would like now to open the floor for a Q&A session. All of the participants here are welcome to join the discussion, ask questions, just unmute yourself, introduce yourself. Is there any volunteer now, or we just continue among ourselves with Q&A? Bożena was the first to unmute yourself, so please.
Sorry, I don't know if it's a question. It's maybe more of the observation. When you look at all the papers from the Department of Foreign Affairs, they have this really good a document brochure which is called Global Island, and this is very much I suppose summarize how this soft and hard diplomacy is basically conducted, and it gets, you know, it is what Martin said, you know, that this is not the population of 4 million, this is the population of 60, and this is how it is being approached. However, what I actually wonder is that because Ireland has such a long tradition of very much exporting than importing people, therefore I suppose it took they have a tradition and the expertise how to approach this. However, other countries, like for example Poland, now you know they have been exported quite a lot of people since 2004. Therefore, I suppose they would need to learn and look at the examples like the Irish one, how to harness the power of the soft diplomacy, how to harness the power of the people, of the individuals. I suppose, you know, to advance this Polish goal, this, you know, this promotion of Poland. So what I am just looking at is that, you know, that here there was this long tradition. Therefore, there was a lot of learning, I presume, done over years, which came with this, you know, with this global island concept, which is very popular, very catchy, and everyone subscribes to it, and a lot of people want to be part of it, I presume.
Thank you, Bożena. I don't know if any of the speakers want to reflect on this. I just wanted to add also something that I previously signaled, because this webinar was designed before the war started, and now we are in a totally different reality that, well, it has relevance to many aspects of our lives. But I would be curious if our speakers would like to share your reflections on that have to do with public diplomacy and well, ongoing war in the case of Poland in a neighboring country.
I'm happy to jump in first if people are.
Yeah, please.
Look, just quickly, I'll come to the public diplomacy in a neighboring country in a moment. I just quickly on Bożena's kind of reflection, I think, and question generally. I think what's really interesting in the Irish context is that, you know, diaspora engagement informally, if you want to use that term, you know, through communities has been happening for centuries, back to the days of writing letters and exchanging. We're still quite young institutionally. You know, the Irish Abroad Unit of the Department of Foreign Affairs, I think, was set up in 2004. The kind of key policy instrument that the department used to kind of streamline a lot of the work, the Immigrant Support Program, kind of set up around the same time. And that's to, coming back to the point about supporting non-profits, that's to support Irish diaspora organizations globally. But I think what's happened is that diaspora engagement as a policy option, if you're asking me kind of look at it quite critically, I think it's only really accelerated in the last decade, to be frank. You know, I think when you look at the number of countries that look at this area, but one of the things within the document that you mentioned is that the Irish government understand they have a leadership role to play in this. What they're keen to do is to establish Ireland as a global leader in this topic. So I've personally been involved with delegations from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs that have come to Ireland, and we like to try and shape that kind of story about how you go about this. And I shouldn't say this in an academic room or an academic platform, but we often say that diaspora engagement is non-competitive. So I'm a big believer in copy and steal everything. In academia, it's called plagiarism. We're not allowed to do it. I want to make that clear from the beginning, but we can learn from different countries. And there's a lot of organizations such as the UN and different kind of players that get involved in that type of work in terms of even that type of diaspora diplomacy, government's learning. Quickly, because I see Dimitri's hand up, I think on the role of diasporas in context of Ukraine, I was personally lucky to be involved with the Ukrainian diaspora preceding the conflict as well. And look, there's a lot of great work going on at the minute in the diaspora. And I think, look, obviously that's in terms of short-term need and kind of meeting not just the humanitarian crisis, but different kind of community needs. I think there's big challenges to make sure that in the mid to long term, that momentum sustains. You know, we've seen this with a lot of diasporas that when things happen, you get that initial mobilization, but keeping it going is difficult. So look, I'd be happy to share connections and kind of some networks that might be able to answer that question better than I could. So I'll be quiet now. I see 2 hands up. So
yes,
that's the question.
Yes, thank you. First, Dimitri, then Kasia, and then I can see here in the chat, Akram may want to ask the question in person. Yes, so Dimitri.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to react on what Martin said about that it's diaspora diplomacy is relatively recent in some way, or is institutionalized recently. And then I come back to Greece, which, as you said, like Ireland started in 2004 having such a unit. Greece had already one in 1983. But the type of diaspora diplomacy has changed a lot, I think. At that time, it was mostly focused on issues of national importance, of national security were very important. And then the second thing would be related to culture and Greek language and supporting the diaspora in learning language. And what Ireland has done very strongly is this more focus on smaller goals and achieving really like business cooperation, investments, cooperation in research, those more practical things, as one may say so. And I'm thinking now that maybe actually that this is just something I thought about right now, is that actually that it was institutionalized relatively late might have helped it also to adapt to the new age, because it didn't have an old background. So it was more easily to adapt to new technologies, new ways of working, etc., because it was born and created within this era after 2000. So I think that might have played a role. And then when it comes to back to the sharing of knowledge that we also heard before, and that Poland could and should learn from others, for example, from Ireland. And like Martin said, that they are willing to share. This is also something that they have actively been doing. Like Ireland has had sessions with other countries where they actually share their knowledge and their way of working. So it's definitely something that is happening and that they are open to. And I agree with Martin that I think we can only learn from each other. Thank you.
And Kasia, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. What shall I start with? Well, when it comes to the war, I think it's hard, especially now, to analyze this war in terms of public diplomacy and treat it as a kind of asset for soft power or even smart power, because this is what I would agree here also with. But what I think and what I would like to point out is that there are at least two perspectives. The first one is social and the second is political. And when I try to put it as being discussed, as it's being discussed, I can see here again, find those two contexts. I mean, the image context, the image building context, and the relationship image context. And we may say that, you know, this is not what we should talk about today. I mean, using the case of Ukraine as even perspective for public diplomacy and its tools, but it's happening. I mean, Poles are involved in supporting Ukrainians. And the question, of course, here is whether they want to be identified with, or do they identify themselves in this idea of narrative of solidarity I mentioned before. So this is the first case. And the second, also in relation to something what was said before, what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs wants to achieve here. Because as I said, it's hard to analyze it in terms of public diplomacy, but this is what we need to say and needs to be emphasized. We have here, of course, this social perspective, so kind of, I would say, altruistic approach, but you know, to be honest, there is also politics involved here. So probably it will be research in the future, but this is my impression here and now when it comes to this example, because this is what I may see here also in relation to my previous research. Thank you.
Thank you. As usually, I guess policy catches up with reality a little bit later. And in the case of Poland, my projection would be that policy would capitalize on this engagement of Polish society now. But I would like here to ask a question that's in the chat from Akram Al-Masnai, who wrote that how to move from being survival diaspora like Syrian or Yemeni and Ukrainian diaspora now to influential diaspora in both the host country and homeland. That's a very practical question indeed. And if I can allow myself a quick response, my recommendation would be to establish or to look for fora of self-organization and reach out and try to create for yourself consultative opportunities, even if such do not exist in your host country or in the homeland. But perhaps any of you of our speakers, if you want to address these questions, how to move from being survival diaspora into being influential diaspora. It is also very much relevant, for example, because before the war started in Poland, there were already 1 million Ukrainian migrants. However, the Ukrainian migrants that are the Ukrainian refugees now during the war, unlike the Ukrainian migrants before the war, refugees are predominantly highly educated and from cities or bigger towns. So it's a different demographic. Would you like to reflect on this question? How to change the mode from survival diaspora to influential diaspora? Yes, Martin?
Yeah, just to quickly kind of come back on that, I think it's important, and I think it links to Catherine's presentation quite well, actually. So sometimes when we think about influence, and sometimes we think about the loudest and the most visible, but I think the parameters of leadership are changing. And I think what we have to understand is that, quite often it's particularly in diaspora communities, it's the quietest ones that you want, to be quite frank, because they can quite often have the most significant influence. So I think, sometimes we have a tendency to use this word as this one catch-all community, particularly from my own research in the North. And please disagree, Catherine, if you disagree, but what I found, particularly looking at the philanthropic and the political sector, it was quite often small clusters of networks that were particularly important. Now, that's not to say that they were more important than maybe the community change making that was happening on the ground in terms of the role of women mediators. So it's about understanding the different layers and the segments of your community domestically and internationally that will have different types of pressure or influence to bring to market, whether that's economically, politically, or whatever it is. So I just wanted to make that point of, what we see as leadership and influence, I think is evolving in front of our eyes. Particularly, you see that with students coming through universities as well in terms of the impact they want to have in the world. I think that is changing in front of our eyes, so we need to acknowledge it.
Thank you. And Catherine, please.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And I want to connect that, Galia, with your observation at the end of the presentation about the difference between the quiet influence and the campaigning around sexual violence. And really, partly what drove this research in the early years was the need to differentiate these two. So what I could see happening was that all of the energy was going into kind of talking about this loud activism and this feminist activism around women and the contribution of women in peace and security. But it's clear there are different, and if you think about the diagram, the overlap isn't huge because there is a need for those who shout really loudly about rights and who make a fuss and who bring, who embarrass the government as a result of it. But those people, even if they're women, are likely to be targeted politically, are likely to end up themselves in exile as members of diaspora and engaging through international and diasporic networks to try and put the pressure on that way. But there is this other then category of the quiet, the ones who are able to sometimes smooth these processes, who are able to make life bearable in the moment. And there's quite a lot of discussion around where are women in the Ukraine talks and things like that. But my guess would be that women are the ones there making violence survivable in a number of communities and sort of managing those local level tensions and things where it's possible. But that these two categories work alongside each other. They're complementary strategies, but that often the quiet gets overlooked. So I think it's thanks for bringing that up, Martin. It brought those 2 points together really nicely. That there's the quiet is important as well.
Thank you. And Dimitri?
Yes, thank you. An interesting point, Catherine. Now, what I wanted to say about regarding like the transition from survival diaspora to an influential diaspora is that, this is not something I have researched, but what I can say is that what helped the Greek and the Irish diaspora particularly is that they already had achieved a certain position in the societies where they were. They were successful in, if one may say so, especially if you look to the Irish diaspora in the US, for example. So they reached positions where they could be of influence and of help. And then they were able also to help their home countries. So I think it's a transition that has to happen slowly, and it has to start first from well, the survival part. You have to first, I think, survive and settle where you are and get a good position where you are before you are in a position to help others, I would say.
Yeah, actually, there is an interesting strand in literature. I did my own part of small research in diaspora organizations, and there is a small strand of literature on the fact that, but that refers to individuals, that some individuals are counterintuitively have more agency, can achieve more being abroad. I say counterintuitively because we somehow, in a shortcut, stereotypically think of migrants as people who are usually in a different country working below the qualifications or stuff. Well, I'm not Polish. I live in Poland, and well, I'm an academic, so well, I'm not working below my qualifications. So I mean, I understand this this narrative, this context. But in terms of literature, there is such, and there is awareness, for example, in NGO activists active abroad, that in fact I can achieve more abroad than at home. So that's an interesting that but regarding communities, I think that could be more challenging or less researched, or I'm less informed about it. But what I know about this is research on individual level, and that such transformation actually happens and that migration and becoming diaspora does not mean that you immediately have to give up on your whatever aspirations and that you will work in substandard work. On the contrary, it could be a springboard. Anybody else from our participants? We have a couple of minutes more, or yes, I see that Mandy unmuted herself. Yes.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion and discourse. Thank you so much for everybody who's contributed. I'm really interested in how small countries like St. Lucia, where I'm from, can benefit from this type of discourse, how the diaspora, especially in the UK, can mobilize to utilize structures that you've put in like this and benefit from it. I'm an aspiring PhD student and looking at diaspora engagement. So this type of discourse really interests me, but I wouldn't have known about it if the lovely Martin hadn't told me about it. So I'm just wondering, like, what could be done to surface this kind of brilliant work and make it more accessible?
Sorry, I did not catch that. Are you located in Ireland?
I'm located in the UK. I'm in London.
You're located in the UK. Okay.
In London. Yeah.
All right. Or because, for example, in Ireland there is Africa Center. That is, it's a very interesting initiative because they are trying to contribute to Irish development cooperation abroad with the experience, with their first-hand experience as diaspora. So I would agree. It's more like it's on the fringes of mainstream academic interests, but as you can see, we're trying hard.
Absolutely. I guess you can consider the Caribbean a diaspora's diaspora. So yeah, with several layers beyond that. But I appreciate what you're doing because this is fantastic work.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else would like to contribute or no? I'll just maybe share something. It's just an observation. It's not outcome of academic discussion or whatever. But the day before yesterday, I met with my MA student. She's Russian. And we are discussing her MA. She's working now she's studying NGO human rights, Ukrainian NGO human rights organizations now during the war. And because in my previous research, I have also studied the work of Polish NGOs engaged also in Ukraine. And I told her, in the opinion, I'm not saying that this is how it is, but it's interesting to compare. In the opinion of those Polish aid professionals, they have contributed significantly to the building of civil society in Ukraine. And she said, she's Russian. She said, no, it was Russian NGOs that contributed to the building of civil society in Ukraine. And I said, well, I think we should ask Ukrainian civil society who, if they think that anybody came to build them at all. But this just our exchange again reminded me of the different perspective that the way that you change your perspective when also you change your hat. Also, because, for example, if you take Polish non-government organizations, some of them in the beginning of the transition, like 30 years ago, were in the beneficiary. So they benefited from foreign aid, and now are providing development cooperation or democratization assistance abroad. And how, when your perspective changes, when your role changes, and the way that you perceive, for example, the role of donors or funders, also sometimes the changes dramatically, like 80%. So there are some universal, I would say, phenomena in this respect, no matter whether you're in Poland or in Ireland, depending on the function that you fulfill in this relationship on an international level. Yeah. So a final call for. Okay, we have 2 more minutes. Then I guess if you would like to, if any of our speakers would like to say final few words before I wrap up this session, now is the opportunity. I'm pasting here, it is my duty, to encourage again everybody who is not yet a member of Development Studies Association Ireland to become one. Here is a link to the membership. And if not, I would like to once again thank you very much to everybody who is with us today, and especially to our speakers, to Dr. Katarzyna Zalas-Kamińska, to Dr. Catherine Turner, to Mr. Dimitrios Tsirakis, and to Dr. Martin Russell for your wonderful contribution. Your presentations, my understanding is that you would agree that those presentations will be published afterwards on the DSAI website. I hope this is a yes. Anyway, I'll reach out to you afterwards with an email. And so those presentations hopefully would be afterwards available under resources on the DSAI website. So thank you once again, and have a good end of the day and a restful weekend, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, folks. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.